Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to look at the scope of variables in Java programs. So we have different levels that variables apply to in a program. And that's usually indicated by the open and closed braces. So for instance, in this open and closed brace inside of the main method, right, and we're in the class tester class, we're instantiating a new object, fraction object F1, and it's calling the no parameter, no argument constructor. Then we're making a new object F2, and that's going to pass the numbers 1 and 2 as integers to a 2 argument constructor. Okay, these two objects, right, that we've created, those variables F1 and F2, they have scope inside of the main method of the program. We would not be able to access F1 or F2 in other contexts. Okay, now system out print line F1, that's valid if we look to see if there's a toString method in the class for fraction objects. There is, so there's a toString method that can be called. And then our next line 8, f2.numerator, that would look for the instance variable in that class, the fraction class where f2 was created, an instance variable called numerator. So when we come down to look at that class fraction, here's our numerator instance variable, but notice it's declared as private. Because it's private, its scope is limited to just inside of the class called fraction. So this class at the top, tester class, where the main method is located, it cannot access from the tester class the instance variable numerator because it's private. Okay, so if we were to try to run this code, we're going to get an error because we're trying to access that variable outside of its scope. So when we look down here, it says numerator has private access in fraction, right? We cannot get to it from outside of the fraction class, okay, not without a getter method. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're gonna comment that line out. Okay, and let's look down here at the scope of the variables in our class fraction. So we have two instance variables, numerator, denominator. They're private, so they have scope only inside the class where they are being instantiated. And then we've got a constructor, and here's another variable, int d equals 1. Now this variable has local scope just inside of its open close braces. So this value d equals 1 cannot be accessed anywhere else in any other method, in any other class. Its scope is limited locally to just this fraction constructor. Okay, then the numerator gets assigned to 1, the denominator gets assigned to 1. Numerator and denominator, remember, have scope inside of the entire class. So when we change their values inside of this constructor, it changes the values for that object's instance in this class. Okay, then we come down to our constructor that accepts 2 arguments, the initial numerator, initial denominator. Okay, those are passed by parameter from the calling of the constructor, and those values then get put in for the instance variable values. So init numerator only has local scope inside of this method, the fraction constructor, and same for initial denominator, only has scope inside of this constructor, and the instance variables have scope inside the entire class, right? So those changes will propagate through. Okay, then in our toString, right, there's our instance variable. It can access that because this toString method is in the fraction class. Okay, then we have int new numerator equals 1. This has local scope just inside of this if condition, right? Because it's inside these open close braces, it cannot be accessed anywhere else in this method or outside of this method in that class. Okay, and then it's going to return the new numerator divided by that denominator. Okay, so if we come back up here and we want to print the F2 numerator divided by the F2 denominator, okay, that would be, let's see, where do we want to do that? That would be in our class here before the toString method, and we're going to need to make a method that returns those values, so an accessor method. So we're going to get numerator, and this needs to return an int. And we can also do get denominator, and that's going to return the denominator. I think I need to spell numerator correctly. There we go, numerator and denominator. So now instead of doing f2.numerator, right, we're going to need to do f2.getNumerator. Okay, then we can call that public method to access the private instance variable. And same then for f2.denominator will become f2.getDenominator. And it's going to do integer division because these were integer values for numerator and denominator. So 1 divided by 2 in integer division is not 1/2, it's going to truncate and return a 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. Oh, what did I do here? Public. Forgot the B in public. Okay, try it again. Oh, new, cannot find symbol. Denominator equals D. Oh, that's right, because remember up here we have local scope for this int D equals 1. So we're going to need to check that denominator equals 1. Okay, so int new numerator equals 1, that would only have scope inside of this method, and we want to use it to come back as a return. So let's see here, we're going to need to make this numerator. So int new numerator and then if denominator equals so int numerator equals numerator, that's the instance variable. If the denominator is 1, new numerator is going to be 1, and then now that new numerator has scope right inside the toString method, not just inside the if condition, we should be able to return it in our return statement. So let's go ahead and test that out, see if we found all the bugs. Oh, it looks like we did. Okay, so now that we've debugged it and run, there's our 1 divide by 1. So when we did system out print line F1, right, that called the toString method. So it came down here and said the new numerator is the numerator, right, which was assigned 1 for the no parameter constructor. Okay, and then the divided by the denominator, which was also assigned the value 1 in that constructor. Okay, then for F2, right, we did a system out print line, but we're having the get numerator called, and that value was passed by parameter, right, the 1. And F2.get denominator, that was passed by parameter. That was the F2 for the instance variables. 1 and 2, and now it output their division. So if we tried to change these, so let's make this, for example, a 9 divided by 2. Now the integer division, 9 divided by 2 is 4.5, truncated is 4. Right? We could also make a change in our D value here inside the no parameter constructor. We'll make the D3, so then next time our output should be 3/3 and then 4. So let's try that and see if those changes take. There we go. There's our 3/3 and our 4. So this problem came from CS Awesome in the scope and access lesson. And the instructions were to, let's see, the following program has scope violations. You need to add methods or use methods that are in the class fraction appropriately. So that's what we did. We created a getter method for the numerator, a getter method for the denominator to access those private instance variables appropriately. We adjusted some of the scope issues. The new numerator was on line 43, only initially had scope inside of those brackets. We repositioned it to line 40 for its declaration so that its scope would be the entire toString method, right? So you want to keep your eye on the scope and access of these different variables when you're writing classes that have variables inside, like you've got your class variables, your instance variables, you've got variables inside of methods that have local scope just to those methods. If we had loops, right, your loop counter has scope only inside of the loop. So you've got to be real careful to keep those straight so that you understand what can and cannot be accessed in which ways.